carefully to a puzzle. So first thing to think about is, well, if I'm making a puzzle, what am I aiming for? I've gone forward to a little bit too far. There we go. So the first thing to think about is, what is a good puzzle? What makes a puzzle well structured in the mind of a puzzle designer, and actually more importantly, a puzzle solver? Um, what do puzzle designers need to think about when they think about making a puzzle? So, a puzzle is a structured challenge that the designer wants someone else to solve, but that doesn't mean the designer wants to make it easy. The point is to challenge, confuse, and befuddle the solver while the puzzle is being worked on, but to make the solver go, oh, yeah, of course, when the puzzle is finally solved. So, a good puzzle has some sort of entry point that gets the solver started thinking along the solution path. Depending on the difficulty of the puzzle, that entry point might be as obvious as the very first clue in a simple crossword puzzle, one down, a young feline, or as obscure as a web page with a repeating flashing static pattern. Well, obviously there's something wrong with the web page, and obviously it's trying to tell me something, but what, where, and why? There's sort of something to catch your attention and pull you in. The more complex a puzzle is, the more it needs checkpoints along the way. That is, as the solver works on the puzzle, they know when they're on the right path or when they're going down a bad one. With a trusty crossword puzzle, you've got words that share letters, so a wrong answer won't fit, and the solver knows when they've put in a word that maybe has the right number of letters, but then it's got letters in the wrong place that make other answers just not work. With a cryptography puzzle, you start getting words, you start seeing regular patterns, and you actually start realizing what the message is. So once again, you know when you're going down the right path. Many puzzles also give their solvers kind of a helping hand along the way. As words get filled in on a crossword puzzle, letters appear in unsolved words, making them easier to guess. They were really hard, but now you know a couple of letters. Maybe you know the starting letter, maybe you know the ending letter, maybe you know that there's a vowel in the middle. Having that little bit of extra information can help you narrow down possible choices and guesses so that you can get you can finally get it. So when designing a puzzle designer really needs to make sure they're thinking about, how does the puzzle explain itself to the solver? That is, how does someone looking at the puzzle know where to get started? How does a puzzle solver know that they're making good progress on the puzzle as opposed to bad progress? When they get to the answer, it's got to fit. It's got to be clear that this is the answer to the puzzle, and you know it's right. And finally, something that is not on this list, but something else that someone needs to think about is, who is the audience for this puzzle? How hard do we want to make it? And how experienced is that audience with the kind of puzzle I'm making? Okay, let's go actually get started thinking about the puzzle we're going to make. The first questions to think about is, well, what kind of puzzle? Well, when I started writing this lecture, I already knew I was designing a cryptography puzzle, one where the solver needed to break a cipher or a code to figure out the final answer. So the next thing that starts me thinking about is, well, what kind of cipher would I like to use? There are some pretty classic ones out there. In fact, there's a lot of very classic ciphers out there. Most cryptography puzzles end up using some sort of version of the Caesar cipher, which is a alphabetic cipher that swaps one letter for another letter. And then the key is usually a number. So if your number is 10 and you want to encode the letter A, you'd start with the alphabet, you count 10 letters down, and you'd encode with the 10th letter of the alphabet to substitute in for A. And you do that for all of the letters. So once you figured out one or two letters, the rest of the code just, boom, it's there. Well, that feels a little simple to me. The Dancing Man code is one that was invented by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the writer of the Sherlock Holmes books. And it's actually one that is kind of cute to use because you can actually hide whether or not there's a code going on by having these little dancing figures scattered about. They don't automatically scream, hey, I'm a code. But honestly, that seems a little harder than what I want to aim for right now. And then Pigpen is another common code that's all over the internet, and it looks kind of weird, kooky writing. It also doesn't automatically say, hey, translate me into letters. So I don't want to use any of these codes, so I'm going to keep my mind open a little bit about what kind of a code I can find. So let's go ahead. Having thought about what kind of puzzle it is, the next really big question is, who is my audience? Who am I designing it for? If I'm designing for novice puzzlers, using just a simple substitution that we can solve for by trial and error is a really good choice, especially if I give them a hint in the setup. If I'm designing for more experienced puzzlers, they're going to want something a bit more than just translating a quote in or out of a substitution cipher. But maybe what I want to think about doing is trying to introduce somewhat inexperienced puzzlers to a slightly more complicated puzzle. Then I can do something a bit more complex than just the alphabetic substitution, but I also need to think about how I give them enough clues and steps. I shouldn't get too fancy and I should stick with something that can be figured out with a one-to-one substitution, but I think I can get a little more complex than just a Caesar cipher. Well, all right. If I think I'm going to be giving my audience, my puzzle solvers clues, I should think about how I'm going to frame those clues and how I'm going to frame that puzzle, how I'm going to frame the puzzle. It could be in the title, could be in the artwork alongside the puzzle. It could be a little story that creates the setting. But I also want it to fit together. I want there to be a theme. So I need to think about, what is that setting? What is that narrative? Well, codes and ciphers. What's the first thing that comes to your mind? The first thing that comes to my mind is spies. So let's imagine that a message was left behind by a spy for someone else, but the spy didn't know who was coming, so they couldn't really use a prearranged code. So they made up a code on the spot, used that to hide the message, and hoped that the first person to solve the puzzle would be on their side. So I've got a setting where I've got a puzzle in a room of some sort with some visual clues of the person who left the puzzle behind. And I have a theme to pull ideas from: spies. Okay. So that's a good thing to have settled down. The next question, oddly enough, is, what is the answer? When you're designing a puzzle, you almost always want to work backwards. If you don't know what the answer is, you can't build in clues, you can't build in hints, you can't build in checkpoints. So you kind of have to know what the answers are before you start building the puzzle. The more complex the puzzle you're building, the more important this point is. There are things called meta puzzles, where you've got a series of puzzles that chain together and you have to answer one puzzle to get a key to solve the next puzzle, to get a key to solve the next puzzle. Well, if you're going to build a chain like that, you can't start with the first puzzle. You almost always have to start with the end puzzle and work your way backwards. You need to know, what answers are you aiming for, so you know what clues and hints to encode to help your audience get to these answers. So my first thought when I started planning out a puzzle that was a cryptography puzzle was to use a quote by someone, preferably an amusing quote that was kind of fun to read. Hopefully one that was long enough to give solvers some space to grapple with the code. But when I start thinking about a spy leaving behind just a quote, and see, here I am going back to my narrative and using it to affect the way that I'm building the puzzle, right? But when I think about a spy leaving a quote behind as the final solution to a puzzle, that doesn't make as much sense to me. Instead, you'd think they'd leave a message saying, "This is where I hid the secret plans," or "Here's a phone number to call me," or a code to a safe, or something like that. But a short number is a terrible thing to encode. Trying to solve a message that is only, 5 or 10 symbols long, that is really, really hard. So you need something that's got preferably more letters or more symbols or more things to substitute for. Ideally, you're looking at something between 40 and 100 characters long. If you get a lot longer than 100 characters, it starts to get very tedious to do that breaking. But again, the longer the passage is, the easier it is to solve, cryptographically speaking. So you can also get way too easy by making your puzzle much too long. So you kind of want to find the sweet spot of not too short and not too long. But I do want to make this a slightly more complex decoding puzzle than just a simple cipher. So maybe I could try to think about a double encryption. The spy encodes a quote, so someone who doesn't realize they're looking for something more decrypts the quote and is done, and misses the second step of the puzzle. That's thinking a bit more like a spy. So I had several Oscar Wilde quotes in mind when I started thinking of and planning for this. When it rains, look for rainbows. When it is dark, look for stars. What is a cynic? A man who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. And finally, an idea that is not dangerous is unworthy of being called an idea at all. When I looked over this sort of selection, the thing that stood out to me for when it rains, look for rainbows. When it is dark, look for stars is also an instruction. It can tell you to do something, which means that if I want to think about trying to structure a second chunk of the puzzle using rainbows and stars, or just rainbows or just stars, then that could be useful for that. So that's how I chose which quote to use. I'm going to go ahead and go with that quote. So maybe if I can think about concealing some sort of number with rainbows and stars, I can still have a spy-like message, but still get a code going on. So that's at least half my answer. I haven't really answered what that second number is going to be, but I think I'm going to leave that one loose for now. So here is sort of my puzzle framework as I sit down and get started. My puzzle type is cryptography. My audience is novice puzzlers who want to stretch and try something harder, or novice puzzlers who are ready to go ahead and try for a more complex puzzle. My setting is spies in a study or an office, and my answers are a quote and a number. Probably since I'm thinking about rainbows and the classic rainbow has 7 items, a 7-digit number. But again, the number bit is a bit flexible. So I can probably think about changing that around later. All right, let's go forward. So what do you find in an office? If I think I want to use images from an office to help cue hints, ideas, codes, what are the kind of things you find in an office? Well, nowadays an office usually just has a computer, to be honest, but it might have a phone, might have a safe or a vault. It's probably got a desk and a chair. Rulers have, tabs and are kind of interesting to think about. And you've got your office supplies, which, thinking to myself, I noticed that the office supplies are nice and colorful. And if I want to think about rainbows, I should be thinking about color. So those are all places that I can think what if any of these could in fact be used to make a code? Well, the office supplies look like they can work with the color part of things. Phones have both numbers and letters on them, which means I could think about using letters and numbers to create a code for encoding my quote. As a matter of fact, if you are an experienced puzzler, there are some very, very famous phone codes. They're pretty common to use. One version is a unique digit pair for each letter, sort of based on the placement of the letter. So since A is the first letter on 2, the code for A is 2-1, B is 2-2, and C is 2-3. The other one is called, the other common phone code is a multi-tap code, where you call, for A is the first letter, so it's just a 2. B is the second, so you get a 2-2, and C is 2-2-2. Obviously, if you're using the multi-tap code, you end up with an awful lot of digits replacing your letters, and there isn't even really a 1-to-1 or a 2-to-1 correlation, and you end up with a lot of numbers running around just for one word, even a short word. So since I'm aiming for more inexperienced puzzlers who I don't expect to recognize this code at first glance, I'm going to use the top one, because it gives me a constant substitution, a constant number of digits to convert back into letters, and I think that'll be a little easier for my solvers. How hard it will be for a novice puzzler, I really don't know, But that's kind of a question for later when I go back and test my puzzle. So I've got my code, I've got my quote. The next step is obviously go ahead and convert that. And let me warn you, I spent about 20 minutes converting this code, checking it again, discovering I'd made several mistakes while while making this relatively simple conversion, and having to go back and try again. As a matter of fact, I'm still not sure I got it 100% right. I'm not sure I would trust myself to have it 100% right until I had some other person go back and translate it for me using the code. Because especially when you're encoding things, it's so easy to make a mistake. So when you're doing this step, when you're encoding anything, don't just double check it, hand it off to someone else to go ahead and take a look, okay? So I've got an old-fashioned phone picture here. It has no Q and no Z. Fortunately for me, there is no Q or Z in my code, in my quote. So I'm just going to ignore Q and Z. But if you look at a modern phone, which is to say a cell phone, honestly, you'll discover that the digital keyboard does in fact have a spot for Q and Z. And they're on there. I'm just going to go ahead and assign them sort of a number, but it's not really relevant for this quote. It would be relevant if I'd chosen a different one, but it's not relevant for this quote, fortunately for me. Now, having actually done the translation, the next question that runs into is, how do I want to present it? There's several different ways I could do it, and doing so changes the difficulty of the puzzle. So one way is to call out each letter substitution separately. So it's very clear that what I've got here is pairs of numbers that probably swap directly for something else, right? And so there I've got all of those numbers with clear hyphens in between them. The next step is to say, that seems a little simplistic. That's almost like the Caesar substitution, except I'm using numbers instead of letters. Instead, if I run them together and make each word clear and distinct, now they have to make the jump that it takes two numbers to code one letter. And that's kind of the additional difficulty I'm looking for here. On the other side of things, if I'm dealing with more experienced puzzlers, I might just go say, you figure out where the words are, and run everything together in one big series of strings of letters. In this case, or numbers, in this case, that's more than I want to do, because I am trying to keep in mind that these are inexperienced puzzlers I'm working with. So I'm just going to go ahead and make them figure out the multiple digits per letter puzzle, but let them know where the word divisions are, so they know exactly what the words are and how many words there are. And now I get to come back to the rainbows and numbers problem. Because I've gotten that quote encoded, it's time to look at the second half of this problem. What I ended up going with was making a series of symbols that you can then pull numbers out of if you take a look at the columns. I have the numbers running down the side, and I think that makes this too easy. But one of the things I've learned in designing puzzles is that puzzles are always too easy for the designer. So I'll give it a first pass with having sort of the numbers very clearly called out. The other thing is that as I was designing this color-based puzzle, I realized that I'd made at least one mistake in my accessibility. If you are colorblind, trying to figure out a puzzle based purely on color is impossible. That's really unfair and cruel, and that's not the way puzzles are supposed to work. Puzzles are supposed to give everybody a fair shake. So I went ahead and labeled at the top the classic rainbow order. Roy G. Biv: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. So if someone does have a visual impairment where they can't tell the colors off the screen, there are some letters to help them figure out precisely which color is which. Again, I think this waters the puzzle down and makes it a little less interesting as a puzzle, but as a designer who wants to encourage accessibility, I think this is an important point to think about and remember when you're making a puzzle, especially if you're making a puzzle that you think is aimed at just a single solver. If you're making a puzzle where you expect a team of people to be working on it, then you can worry a little bit less about, is someone tone deaf if I'm designing a puzzle that includes sound? Is someone colorblind if I'm designing a puzzle that involves colors? Because chances are very low that everyone on the team will have the same accessibility issue. And that gives everybody sort of a unique point that they can sometimes add in and use advantageously. I don't feel like there's a very, very clear answer to this, or that once you've gotten the solution, it pops at you. And that's a problem that I do want to come back to and address. But for now, I want to get back into designing the puzzle and working on the puzzle. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. One moment. I'm going to mute briefly so that I can warn my daughter that I can hear her. Okay, no. All right. She has wandered off again. Sorry about that. All right, now I need to figure out where I was. Right. Pulling the puzzle together. So you remember a long, long time ago, I said that you ought to have a clear entry point, some checkpoints along the way, and a clear and fitting answer. Having gotten as far as I've gotten, I want to go ahead and do sort of a double check to make sure that I am in fact meeting those points. So as far as a clear entry point goes, I feel like having a series of numbers grouped in a word-like pattern screams to me, translate me, I'm a message. So that looks like a very clear entry point to me. On first blush, looking at that tangle of figures and letters and colors doesn't really have an entry point, but that's okay, because that's going to be an entry point you get after you finish translating the message. And in fact, it becomes a checkpoint. You've got a message that talks about rainbows and stars. You've got a image here that has stars in a rainbow pattern. Look, you're clearly on the right path here. You don't know if you should look for rainbows and stars unless you know that it's both dark and rainy, which sort of popped a title to the puzzle right into my head. It was a dark and stormy night. I suppose I could be more hackneyed and cliched if I wanted to be, but I'm not sure I could be. But that's okay. That's okay. Sometimes the easy cliches are the ones that are fun. And a puzzle should not just be a puzzle, it should also be fun. Ideally, it has a little bit of humor, a little bit of laughter somewhere along the way. I still feel like that clear and fitting answer is missing for my pattern set. So I'm going to think about that one a little bit more. But let's go ahead and pull this puzzle together and see what it might look like. All right. So here we have the puzzle. This is a little crowded. Ideally, because I'm trying to cram it onto a slide, ideally it would be on like an 8x5 by 11 piece of paper, and there'd be a little more space for things to spread out a bit. But so I've got my title. It was a dark and stormy night. And I have even a little intro description. Agent D has locked the plans you need in her vault. Can you unlock the keypad before she gets back? She claims everything you need is here on this desk. And so I've got several pictures here. The ruler and the map and the stationery are really just sort of there to confuse the issue. The map has letters on it and numbers. So it's another thing that could make people think that, oh, is there some connection between there? The phone has letters and numbers and is, of course, the actual clue, and would allow someone to translate it very directly, pretty clearly. I've got the colors here in this stationery picture, again, mostly to be a distraction. And for people who maybe don't speak English as their native language, or who don't, like me, remember as well what the official order of the rainbow is, I've got a group of pens or brushes arranged in the same rainbow order that I've got. Now that becomes less important with the spelling out of Roy G. Biv on the pattern here, but I'd rather have too many clues than too few. It's always easier to pull out a clue of a puzzle as you go back to tune it up and fix it than it is to put clues in. So if I think about where the clues should be from the beginning, I can pull them out if it turns out there's really just too many. And finally, I've got that vault keypad to let people know what is the final answer you're looking for. So there's also another flaw here. How does the solver know that they're supposed to put numbers versus letters on the keypads? There should be a way to confirm that numbers are expected here, but putting a little input keypad next to the vault keypad made the slide a lot more crowded, and it didn't look good, and it didn't make a lot of visual sense to me either. So here's the puzzle. It's what I would call it about 90% of the way. It's lacking that, oh yeah, when I get that final keypad code, it's just a string of numbers, and there's nothing that makes it obvious that it is the correct answer to the solver. It also feels to me a little disconnected from the original puzzle because you're not getting any feedback or any pats on the back. You just get this series of numbers that is kind of eh. I have a few thoughts on how to fix that. I actually have an idea as to just what I would do to fix that, to try to get a better oh yeah answer. But I was kind of hoping to leave that as a puzzle for the viewer. So you can think about what you could do, what you would do to make the final answer kind of fall into that yeah category. There. So that's really kind of the presentation. That's my set of puzzles. If you've got any, that's my puzzle and my explanation of it. If you've got any questions, now's a really good time to ask them. Well, I'm not seeing any questions. Is anyone still out there? Ah, okay. Philip is reminding me there's going to be a bit of a delay between questions being posted and questions being visible. I'm not very good at hamming it up, so I'm not really sure what to fill things in with, but okay, I do see one good question, which is what do you mean by an oh yeah answer? And can you give an example? And another question is how would you test not just for correctness, but for accessibility and difficulty level? So I will go ahead start with the oh yeah answer, and then I will answer the other question. So for an oh yeah answer, something that fits with the theme of the puzzle and the theme, something that fits with the theme of the puzzle, something that fits with the answers and the clues, and it's clear that it is the best answer that could come out. You are not left wondering as the solver, is this the right answer or not? Which is why I feel very strongly that the vault keypad is not an oh yeah answer, because it could be any string of numbers, and as someone who's just solved it, there's no way to confirm that you got the right set of numbers, honestly. With the quote, you kind of get an oh yeah answer because you get an actual quote. You get a series of words, they make sense. It's clear that you've solved the puzzle and you've gotten an answer that gives you a yes, this is the answer. So testing for the next question is how would you test not just for correctness, but for accessibility or difficulty level? Whew, testing is hard. Testing for correctness Ideally, you find somebody who is in fact a good puzzle solver and they rip through your puzzle and they confirm that, yep, you got it all right. That's actually the easy side. For difficulty level, what you want to really do is have a pool of people who are at the level of puzzle solving that you think you want to do, novice puzzle solvers, reaching out to people who haven't solved puzzles before or who are just beginning puzzlers and saying, hey, could you give this a try for me? Having them solve it while you sit there and watch and keep your mouth shut, which, having tested puzzles, is perhaps one of the hardest things in the world to do. Watching them do it, seeing where they run into problems, and taking a lot of notes. How do you find, so here is perhaps the hardest question ever. If you need to find non-puzzlers to test, how do you find them to check for difficulty? Well, first of all, you're not ever going to find non-puzzlers, because somebody who just doesn't like solving puzzles is not going to want to solve your puzzles, and you need to find people who are willing to work on your puzzles. But you can go, well, thanks to, among the reasons we're having this discussion online, everything has gotten harder in the era of, oh dear. One moment, while hopefully somebody in my household answers that phone and gets it out of the way. Okay, so before pandemic, I would strongly have recommended going to a cafe, going to a park, going to a library, and just seeing if people wandering through, putting up a little sign, hey, test puzzles, and seeing who wandered over and was interested and sat down to play it or whatever. If you have a college campus nearby, it's a great place to find people to test things. College students love to try things. They're not always the best inexperienced audience, but they at least give you a first pass audience. So yeah, everything gets harder with social distancing. And to be honest, I haven't solved this problem yet. It's one that we're looking at with our game design students, and we're trying to figure out, hey, how do we get you testers to test your games who are not, the people you're living with, your close friends, the 8 people you stay in contact with on Zoom. I haven't got a good solution for this one yet. If you have online networks, those are good to cultivate. If you have friends, or if you have kids who have friends, kids are great. Kids are great testers. So if you can tap into any sort of kid line, I often end up using my middle schooler and my high school child to do some first pass testing of puzzles. They're really good at finding mistakes in my puzzles, and they're always very happy to point them out to me. So yeah. Okay, and I have a comment from someone. If the goal is to create a puzzle for inexperienced puzzlers, the red herring of the map seems to be a bit too much, as it's got letters in a grid. It could be frustrating and confusing. And that's actually a really helpful piece of feedback there. And my goal was to just have it be another piece of confusion, so it was not completely obvious that the telephone was the only thing with letters and numbers, but those letters are much clearer than the letters on the telephone. So instead of becoming a red herring, I believe that Scott is pointing out that those letters become very attractive, and someone could spend a lot of time thinking, oh yeah, numbers are like grids. So I think that's actually a very good point and a very good criticism of this puzzle. I should find something that is not quite as attractive, something that is not as attractive a nuisance, I guess, to be my red herring. So yeah, thank you. And another question is, are there any puzzle cliches you've seen too much and recommend avoiding at all costs for originality's sake? Well, that's kind of hard to answer in a lot of ways. This puzzle is, in fact, I think, a bit of a puzzle cliche. But if I'm aiming at people who aren't as experienced in puzzles, the people who are familiar with puzzle cliches are, in fact, the people who solve puzzles every day, who eat puzzles for breakfast, who have a really deep knowledge and understanding of the types of puzzles and things like that. Whereas more inexperienced puzzlers really appreciate, in fact, some of those cliches to lean on. I mean, if you take a look at a crossword puzzle, you're not spending any time trying to figure out how to solve it. Most people know how to do them. On the there's simple crossword puzzles, right? There's a fancier type of crossword puzzle called a cryptic crossword puzzle, where the clues depend both on wordplay and definition to give you an answer. And they take what is, theoretically a simple puzzle, a crossword puzzle, and turn it into something much, much harder. So, I think you can, I don't know. There's a lot to be said for familiarity in puzzles. And I think that especially when you're trying to introduce new people to puzzles, when you're dealing with more experienced puzzlers, I think one of the things you're trying to do is find a way to describe a puzzle or create a puzzle they haven't already seen before. That's what they're looking for. And almost anything new is nice. Scott has a really good comment, which is on finding puzzlers and finding people who would like to test them, which is reaching out to a public library can help you build contacts to find non-puzzlers. Running a joint program with a librarian gets you access to a wider audience. That's from Scott Nicholson, who is an extremely experienced puzzle designer and puzzle creator who does escape rooms and lots of other things. So, question is, we've seen several problems in my puzzle here, and I'm going to pose this to the viewers because why not outsource? Can you think of something I could substitute in for that problematical mapograph so that the only thing with letters on my clue board is not the telephone? And can you think of some ways to make this mass of colors and symbols less intimidating? If this were an online puzzle, I might think about having this panel with the colors and symbols only show up after you solve the quote. But that doesn't work as well with a paper presentation, with a one-page presentation. I suppose you could say, hey, once you've solved the quote, unfold this. But otherwise, you're kind of trapped into presenting all of the information all at the same time. So I've got a comment that there's a suggestion you could show a picture of Oscar Wilde being shown on a PC screen, because that is in fact where the quote is coming from, and that would help some, and that would be a good way if somebody realized that that's a quote. That would be a good way to say, well, that bottom section might translate back to Oscar Wilde. So that would be another entry into getting that first translation done. That's a good suggestion. I like that. Um, I've got another idea from John Brummels, which I also very much like, is if you could find a word that follows the pattern A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D, B, E, C that was spy or plans related, you replace those numbers 1 through 5 with letters and make that the keypad code. That would also be, and the other thing is that that is one way to do it. And the other thing to do is note that I'm not wedded to the number that comes out or the code or the order. So I could easily reorder. I could change the number of symbols on that if I wanted to make it a longer word, if I wanted to get it up to, if I wanted to make it a longer word, if I wanted to have more range of letters, I could do that. The stars, this is a very arbitrarily designed image right now. I could also rearrange the stars. Since I've given the rainbow, if I wanted to make it link back to the original code, I could even take off, I could even reduce my rainbow from 7 pieces down to 6. Remember, I've got that image there that shows the rainbow, and so I could take off, indigo, which, let's face it, rainbows actually don't have indigo in real life. You can't see it. I believe you ended up with rainbows have 7 colors in them because somebody decided that there were 7 celestial spheres. Real rainbows, the indigo is invisible. So so you could go down to 6, and then you could actually generate a number pattern that matched the pattern. You could get a 6. You could get an answer that was 6 numbers, which could then translate back into a 3-letter word using the original code that you translated the quote from. And that would kind of pull it back all together. I think that is the way I was thinking of cleaning it up when I was trying to come up with a solution. Scott also suggests, which I very much like, replacing the map red herring with the keypad. So the only thing presented as the puzzle is the code. The players then get to use more of the elements that are actually in the setting. Instead of just the phone and the rainbow, the number of elements in the picture that tie back to the puzzle is greater than the number of red herring elements. And I think that that's actually a really good idea as well. That's one way to solve it. I'd love to hear if other people have other ideas. So the other thing that can be done is I can try to tune up the message a little bit. I'm not sure if the title is too cliched. That's the other thing I keep eyeing is it's a dark and stormy night. The other thing you could do is, if you're worried about the rainbows and the accessibility, is take the colors out of it entirely. Instead, just have a pattern of symbols, a series of symbols in a completely different grid than I've got here. And you could say, instead of calling it a dark and stormy night, you could go with, it was a dark night. Maybe you're only looking for rainbows. It was a rainy day. So maybe the message becomes a little bit more interesting to translate because, hey, now you're only looking for stars. Now you're only looking for rainbows. And that's both a way to simplify it if you choose to take out some elements, or a way to make it a little harder if you choose to leave all of those elements in. These are all ways that you can tweak the puzzle and change its difficulty level and change its accessibility level and go back and say, hey, I think I made this mistake. One of the things I have noticed when designing puzzles is that I really do need the feedback of someone else taking a look at the puzzle and telling me where I think something is very obvious, and and I can make that intuitive jump 1, 2, 3 very easily, but someone else is having a problem with it. Or in a place where honestly, I have problems with that intuitive jump. So I've actually put in too much structure, and people sit down, take a look at it and go, "Oh, yeah, I can solve that." And I'm like, "Oh, I was hoping that would take you at least a few minutes." Okay, time to try again. One of the stories of puzzle design, much like the story of game design, is be prepared to do it wrong. Be prepared to do it wrong a lot. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to have things that are intuitively obvious to you, but that no one else ever sees. You're going to make it way too hard. You're going to make it way too easy. Um, you're going to use an abbreviation or a comment or a piece of slang that is very obvious or inherent to you or to the small group of people you hang out with. And as soon as the puzzle goes outside of that small niche area, it suddenly becomes completely impenetrable. Um, and that's why making a puzzle is almost always an iterative process. Yeah, you set up your framework. You ask yourself the questions of what kind of puzzle am I making and who am I making it for? And how hard do I want it to be? What kind of a setting do I want? Where do I want the answer to be? And you get 2/3 of the way through it and you realize that you've made a mistake somewhere back. And so you go back and maybe you reevaluate what kind of puzzle you're making or who you're making it for, or some of the decisions you made early on. You need to be completely unafraid of being really ready to rip up your puzzle and try again, with a new set of ideas and a new set of assumptions, if you really want to make a good puzzle. Ha! Someone has solved our puzzle. John Brommels sends 5243661, uses 6 different numbers and yields the word Kim. Maybe that is Agent D's first name, or the first name of the person who owns the desk. And that would be easy to signal by having, say, a nameplate on the desk. Thank you, John. Yeah, that's brilliant. I really like that. I'm not going to make these changes in real time because trying to change the slides while they're being shown up on TV or on YouTube is more than I want to tackle. But I really like that idea. That's a great solution. Especially actually having it on the nameplate, like Kim David's desk, which looks completely irrelevant till you get the answer, and then you realize, oh, the answer is Kim, and look there on the desk, it says Kim, and that kind of feels a lot like a nice oh yeah, because it correlates back to some clues that are already in the puzzle, clues that you didn't use at all and that you weren't thinking about. But that lets you get that feeling of yes, that fits and it's there. It's got oh yeah, and yeah, you have to add several more elements in to get to that oh yeah, but that's fine. That's part of building a puzzle. If you have to go and sort of backfit the puzzle to make sure that your oh yeah fits it right, you're doing the work that a puzzle designer wants to do. Okay, are there any other questions, thoughts, or comments out there?
Hey, Sarah, that was a
Hey.
great talk. So can you leave us out with, if I was to make a puzzle right now, like I have 10 minutes right now, how could I, like, I've got a great structure for how to do this. What would I do? Where could I start? And how could I make a puzzle in like 10 minutes right now?
Whew. I think if I were going to make a puzzle in 10 minutes, my very first thought would be, what's the answer? And I would kind of concentrate just on what do I want the answer to be and what do I want the puzzlers to be doing. So I wouldn't want to This is very geared towards being a cryptography puzzle, but there's a lot of other kind of puzzles out there. There are logic puzzles, and so I might well think, okay, I want to think about what kind of puzzle I want to make. Maybe I want to make a word puzzle. Okay, if I want to make a word puzzle, um, let's go to the Scrabble. There's Scrabble dictionaries online. They're great. They will give you letters. They will give you words with particular letters in them of a particular length that start with a letter that end with a letter. So you can say, okay, I want to create an anagram puzzle where I take 3 words, none of which share the same letters, and scramble them together, and then somebody tries to come up with it. Okay, well, let's come up with a phrase for me to scramble. Scrambled eggs. Scrambled eggs. So I'm gonna use the, and that breaks one. It's got some shared letters, but who cares? But so if I'm gonna make a scrambled eggs puzzle, I'm gonna make the puzzle, word scramble. Scrambled eggs is one of the phrases in it, and maybe it's the very first one to sort of get people started as an easy one. And I take all the letters in scrambled eggs and I scramble them together. If I'm feeling really clever, maybe I go see if I can get several words back out of them. So scrambled eggs, maybe I can get Sam. Anyway, I'm terrible at trying to design puzzles quickly. I'm the person who does it all sort of sloggingly and slowly. But yeah, I think that's for the 10-minute version. I think what I would really do is try to figure out what kind of puzzle I wanted to make, figure out an answer, and think about what I wanted people to be doing in the puzzle. As that's an aspect I didn't actually talk about in this design is what do people have to do to solve the puzzle? And if I'm designing it a very quick puzzle, then I'm probably thinking more about the actions the players are taking than trying to come up with a really cool setting or narrative or anything like that. So yeah, go out there, design some puzzles. It's fun.